Welcome back to Crime Capsule Live. So, today we're going to unpack the latest in the Nancy Guthrie case. There have been so many developments since we last talked about this case. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie, disappeared from her Tucson home on January 31st, 2026. It's hard to believe it was several months ago. She was reported missing the next day. Local police and FBI investigators believe that she was abducted.
Yeah, Amanda, her disappearance prompted this massive search. We've all been watching it for months now. Everyone was looking for Nancy and just answers. There were alleged ransom notes sent to the media and TMZ. Tons of thousands of leads came in to the FBI and the sheriff's department in Tucson. And then, of course, the day that we saw the video of the suspected mass kidnapper from Nancy Guthrie's Ring doorbell camera, all of that, you thought you were going to get a break, but still no leads to her whereabouts. And we're going on like day almost 60 at this point.
Yeah, and throughout this entire ordeal, Savannah Guthrie has been using her platform, which is a national platform, as one of America's most well known TV news people, to ask for the public's help on social media, along with her brother and sister. And, she's made these passionate pleas, tearful. They've promised a $1 million reward, which is huge. And still, no one has come forward with information to help solve this case.
Yeah, I have to say, after all of that, I'm surprised. And I think this interview that she did on March 24th with Hoda Kotb, was a long time coming. She shared her story in just a agonizing interview with Hoda, not only announcing her plans finally to come back to the Today Show, which we all wondered was going to happen, but a lot of new little tidbits rather, and details as to how her family and she and her siblings are just dealing with this nightmare that has kind of at this point gone a little cold.
Yeah, and I think what we've learned is that there was so much noise, right, surrounding this case. So now we're hearing it from her. We're hearing the facts from her and not from a blogger or somebody on YouTube or somebody, who doesn't really have the information. She talked about the day it happened. She talked about being in New York, getting a call. She's home with her family, getting a call from her sister in Tucson saying mom's missing. And then all the little details that we knew some of them, we didn't know all of them. She talks about blood on the front step, which we knew about. She talks about the Ring doorbell camera being ripped off. But the one thing that I think both of us were really struck by is that back door that was left wide open. So in the beginning, it's like, oh, did she wander off? But then the whole family said, no, 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 no. She couldn't have done that. She's got health issues. So then they went to, well, maybe the EMS came. Maybe there was a 911 call. She had a problem and they didn't close the door. But the brother, Cameron, and I didn't know this, was in the military. He was in the Air Force. He flew planes. He has a military background. And so he immediately said to Savannah, no, I think this is a kidnapping.
So many things to unpack just in the initial part of that interview. Like you said, the back door open. Savannah came out and said, she too saw the blood that was on the front steps. Quickly as she and Cameron and Annie all put their heads together, they realized that this was not, she didn't just walk off or have a medical emergency, because she left in her pajamas, no shoes on, ripped from her bed. Her medication was still there. Her cell phone was still there. Her purse was still there. So a lot of clues really, really early on that this was not an accident, but something intentional. And of course, Amanda, that led her to ask her brother, do you think that this is because of me? Because I'm so well known, because I'm famous, because I'm so forward facing? And he quickly kind of said, yes. And I can't imagine, as a mother, as a daughter, as a sister, the weight of your mother missing and likely dead, possibly kidnapped in the middle of the night, is a fault of your own, not intentionally, but just based on who you are.
I thought that was one of the most heartbreaking parts of the interview when she said, It's too much to bear to think I brought this to her bedside. And she actually apologized to her mother. I mean, it was heartbreaking. I think what we're learning too about this family, again, lots of speculation online in social media, is that they really operate as a unit. She talked about how close she is to her brother, Cameron, how close she is to her sister, Annie, and also her brother in law, Tommy. And she really praised them. She said, "We are a unit. We are a family. We are talking about everything." She said, none of the social media that she did without them, even the ones she did alone. She vetted everything through the family unit. And I think it's pretty interesting because she just talks so much about how Annie and her husband had taken care of her mother so beautifully while she's living in New York. And so I think she really dispelled a lot of this chatter and this noise.
Yeah, we mentioned early on this chatter with Ashley Banfield that she knew someone that was close to the investigation that really pointed the finger at the brother-in-law because their car was, taken into evidence and there was a lot of activity at the house. I think Savannah did a good job of dispelling that. And of course, nothing has come of that speculation so far within him being a person of interest or what. But you really could see that unit and that bond that they had when they appeared together on all of these videos that they did pleading with the kidnapper, pleading for leads, pleading for prayers. And I think that leads me into the next thing that was interesting, that Hoda asked about the ransom notes. There were so many that were floating around. And I think listening to Savannah say, that there was two that had some validity. And, from me, my perspective, and from you as a journalist, I was kind of screaming at the television at this point saying, okay, Hoda, follow up and say, and ask her, what did those ransom notes say? And did you pay the ransom? There was just some things that weren't said, and it could have been an agreement that they had not to ask follow-up questions because she can only say so much. She gave so many hints, but I wanted Hoda to ask more, like, okay, did you pay them? What did the ransom notes say? Did they indicate she was alive or dead?
I'm pretty sure they had an agreement because I feel the same way. What I thought was interesting is she talked about the public ransom notes, the ones that went to the media, the ones that we'd been hearing about that TMZ received, and I think another local media outlet in Arizona. She said, I don't think those are real. She said, I've never seen them and I don't think they're real. But she verified and confirmed, and we've never gotten this information before, that there were two that came to the family because there was so much talk about, well, the family never got any, so we're going to discount these ransom notes. But it sounds like the family did get some. And she said she thought they were credible, but that's it. She didn't go beyond that. Because it's just crazy. If there were demands, she would have made those demands. She would have paid that.
Exactly. And so that left me kind of, wondering kind of where that is, where that stood. Did she pay and nothing happened? I mean, obviously we don't know. We're just completely speculating, but that definitely left me wondering. And I think, we probably land on the same page with the part that the raw emotion and the agony that she shared in this interview took a lot of courage, and it took a lot to come out there and really put all of your emotions on your sleeve for the public to see. And I think it just gave us a personal perspective on what this family is going through, because we hadn't seen that before. It's just been a lot of nuts and bolts with law enforcement. And, this is a case that had a lot of national media attention, but news is cyclical, as we know. And the war in Iran started, and this was kind of pushed away. So I think she did a good job of keeping it in the forefront of everybody's mind. And man, your heart just breaks for her and her family as she just shared what they have been going through.
Yeah, and I thought she did it with such grace and such authenticity to the point where, it was almost unbelievable. She was poised, but she was also, like you said, so emotional, and you could feel that emotion during the interview. I thought another question that was kind of deflected, and I think this also relates to the maybe an agreement of what they would talk about was, what do you think about the investigators? Do you think they're doing a good job? And so what she said to that was, I'm really thankful they got the ring camera video, which is not exactly answering that question, but that's what she said. She said, that video has been, instrumental in pushing this case forward.
Yeah, and I think she said the first thing out of her mouth was, well, the investigation is still going. But there's been a lot of speculation and a lot of criticism on how quickly the Pima County Sheriff's Office um, let go of that home, for lack of a better word, in terms of it was secure, and then they released it back to the family.
Yeah, they
a day
released the
later. It
crime
was
scene. Yeah.
way too quick, and then only to cordon it back off again. But and I think you said it right. There's only so much she could say, but I'm sure her family has criticized, or is, wishing things might have been a little bit different. We heard that they hired their own private investigation team at one point to see if they could run some parallel investigations. There's been criticism about the DNA samples and where they went off to, whether the sheriff sent them off to Florida to a private lab, but not the FBI's lab in Quantico. So, a lot of it is just kind of swirling around the internet. It's hard to know what's true, but yeah, that was an interesting bit, is that she just chose to say enough, but not too much.
And I think a big part of that is when you're in a situation like this, and of course, none of us have been, although you and I have covered these situations, you don't want to upset the people that are trying to help you. Even if you disagree with some of their tactics, you need to stay on good terms with them and be diplomatic. We kind of touched on this a few minutes ago, but this speculation about the family, about could it be somebody in the family? Could it be somebody close? And she called this speculation irresponsible, cruel, pain on top of pain. There are no words. I mean, let's talk about that for a second, because in some ways it may have kind of sent the investigation in the wrong direction when they really needed to be focusing on the guy in this video.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack. I mean, I have a hard time understanding right now how they haven't identified the person in the video, or
Me too.
have they, and they're just trying to track them down. I mean, what is your theory on that, in terms of
I tell you what,
biggest lead they have? And
it blows my mind, because we hear all the time about technology that exists to look at somebody's face and get facial recognition, and certainly eyes are part of that. We've got his body type, we've got the clothing he was wearing, which was very specific. There's so many things. We've had the way he walks, his gait. Everything about him is revealed in that video, other than his actual face. And if you have the best minds at the FBI working on this, it blows my mind as well that this has not been solved. I mean, we've seen cases with a whole lot less video or information be solved.
yeah, and just the subsequent video surveillance that is around there from neighbors and from, gas stations and things like that, and the Walmart that he potentially could have gone in and bought the backpack and things of that nature. It's mind blowing to me that there isn't any headway that's been made. The only thing that I could think of is maybe this person fled to Mexico and they're harder to track. I mean, it's one of those things that is frustrating as a reporter to say, like, well, wait a second, you have all these tools in the toolbox from the best investigators in the world. You don't have a person of interest yet or anything, it's just, and maybe they do, and they're keeping things close to the vest. And this is all, of course, just pure speculation, but it just has me wondering, what is going on behind the
Yeah,
scenes.
it is hard to understand. And obviously, based on the video, this person was not a professional kidnapper. I mean, putting the pieces of a bush up against the camera to try to hide the lens, and kind of walking around when, you should be in and out if you're kidnapping someone. So given that, you think they would have made a mistake. They would have told somebody. They would have been seen. It's really hard. It's really hard to understand. I agree. The other thing I think we got from this interview, and tell me if you agree, was her talking about her mom really in a lot of depth. And what I got out of that was that this woman was just was a very strong person. Her husband died when she was 46. She had 3 young children. She had never worked outside the home. All of a sudden, she has to get a job. She was also taking care of her mother and also a brother with Down syndrome. And Savannah just said, like, she is the strongest person. She's a shining light. She has this incredible sense of humor, and she has this very strong but quiet faith. She's not proselytizing, but her faith is very important to her.
Yeah, I mean, Savannah's dad died when she was 16, and you really got a sense of how her mother was grieving, but picked herself up by the bootstraps, raised these 3 children, was able to stay in the same home that is the center of this investigation. And started out with a little part-time job, then went full-time, and you could just see how the perseverance and just the drive from Savannah's mom. We really got a more of an in-depth look on so many hurdles that she's overcome, while kind of silently grieving and living as a widow for, gosh, 40 some years now at this point. And raising these kids and having them go off to college and in the military like Cameron. And I think that is where I saw in that interview, you could tell that Savannah is pulling a lot of her strength that she has learned from her mother. And we can talk about faith here in a moment, but I think that's a big part of what we learned in this interview. And I think those are things that came from Nancy that are instilled in Savannah and her siblings, but really got a sense of Nancy's deep faith and how she's passed that on to Savannah. And that faith was really a centerpiece of this interview as well.
Absolutely, because it's impossible to imagine how somebody gets through something like this so devastating. And she kept going back to thinking about her mom waking up in the middle of the night and seeing somebody over her bed and what that must have been like, and the terror and the horror of that. She also talked a little bit about media attention, which is really interesting if you think about it, because she has covered so many cases over the years. She has been on the other side of this for so many years. And oftentimes, when I know I was confronted in a situation where I knew legally I was allowed to be where I was, I was behind the crime scene tape, I was on public property, and we're told to leave or asked to leave or taunted. She basically just said, it got to be too much for us. I mean, it got to be too much. And when I was young, I always used to say, it's my job. I'd tell somebody when they asked me to leave, it's my job. But then, as you get a little bit more experience in this industry, you start to realize, well, it may be my job, but it doesn't mean everything that we do is right as the media. And of course, this case has gathered so much attention. She talked about having to move around, right?
I was
From
just
house
going
to
to say that.
house,
Yeah.
which is crazy. And then having to leave one house one night through the desert in the dark and like have, somebody they'd hired to pick them up somewhere
Yeah.
else. I mean,
Yeah.
that blows my mind.
I was struck by that too, because we didn't know any of these sort of behind the scenes details. Um, it doesn't surprise me. The media was so hungry for this story and had an insatiable appetite. And it's like now the story before this Dateline interview or this Savannah interview was on the Today Show and multiple platforms, it was kind of dead, right? Because there's been so many other stories that have taken the headlines. But yeah, I mean, she's a public figure, not the biggest in the world, in my opinion, but it was just amazing to see all of these people camped out for so long and how they were having to evade the media in so many ways as well. I think the next point, Amanda, that came out of that interview that we were all kind of wondering about was, how does she go on career wise? She's been at the helm of the seat for quite some time, having worked her way up through the network and being a lawyer as well. And it's just like, and I think I remember the first thing she said was, how can I go on, but how can I not go on? And it makes you kind of wonder, she's set to come back now on April 6th, what she's going to be like. We see Savannah very serious, one of the best interviewers, I think, in journalism, high profile interviews and things of that nature, and also funny and sweet and very family forward. So I am wondering, what do you think about this move that she's jumping back on air, uh,
Right.
right after Easter?
I mean, it was interesting because like you said, she said, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try it. And she talked about how the Today Show crew and cast are her family, and how important it was when she visited them prior to this interview to come see everybody. And she basically said, I I'm going to be different, but I don't know how I'm going to be different. And she said she's willing to try it. Going back to the faith that we talked about a few minutes ago, I think that's the thing that's really driving her to be able to move forward. Like you said, she lost her father at 16. Her mother taught her to be very strong, taught all of them to be strong. One of the things her mother said, and I actually really love this, is when you are in the midst of grief, you must decide and do. So every morning you've got to get up and you've got to put your feet on the ground and you've got to keep moving forward. My mom passed away 13 years ago, obviously not under a circumstance like this, but from cancer. And I think took just a handful of days off and came back to work. And I remember thinking, how am I going to be in front of a camera when I'm feeling all this emotion inside? And, I really think she's just leaning into her faith. She's leaning into the strength her mother gave her. One of the great quotes I heard from this interview was, we have love and comfort from God in equal measure to our sorrow. And I thought that was really profound.
hmm She's leaning into, like you said, her extended family. She's leaning into what she knows best. It's a routine. It's something that she enjoys. I mean, she can't just go sit in Tucson, right? I mean,
Mm-mm.
so I think, like you did, you've got to keep your mind and your body busy. You've got to be surrounded by people that you enjoy and that lift you up. And she still has responsibilities outside of this work that she was kept from while in Tucson, and that is just being a mother
Yeah, she's got young children.
to two young children, right? And so I think she feels safe in New York and back with her family and her husband. And it'll be interesting to see sort of next Monday morning, sort of what her demeanor is like. And, I think a lot of people are going to be excited that she's going to be coming back. And I think that a lot of people will give her a lot of grace for doing so and being
For
courageous to do
sure.
that.
And she's talking about the Today Show, and she said the Today Show is all joy and light, which is really what a morning show, news show is. Of course, they cover the serious stories, but for the most part, a morning show is a lot lighter than the evening news, for example. And she said something really another thing that was really powerful, where she said that she wasn't going to let the kidnapper or kidnappers steal her joy. And she wasn't going to let them, him or them, take her away from her children. That was so important to her. I want to go back for 1 minute to talk about something that happened with her and her siblings. At one point, and this was a couple weeks ago, they went to the house. They went back to the house that Nancy lived in, the house that Nancy was taken from. They looked at the tributes that had been put in front of the house, flowers and balloons and cards and everything. And she said, this house is sacred ground. Like, this house was a safe place. This is where they all grew up. And I think that was part of this processing for her, maybe processing that grief.
Yeah, those were some really hard images in that video that was captured where she and her sister and brother-in-law came out and were able to look at all the signs and the well wishes and the prayers and all of the yellow. Um, and you're right. I think it's just one step in that grief process that she, is going through. And, I kind of wondered when I watched that, like what they were thinking, her, Annie, and Tommaso. Um, I feel like it's just surreal. Like and she said this in the interview, like, wait, my mom? Like, how is my mom missing? Like, who would want to take an 84-year-old who can barely walk? But it's sort of just like seeing all that. It would make me feel like I'm just living in a movie. Like, it just doesn't make sense in your brain. But it was sort of like, it was kind of watching her go through this process of grief and hope and prayer, you know.
I,
It's just
I
so
also
much.
thought she addressed something that I think was on a lot of people's minds when she said, we're no different than anyone else. And she said, I'm sure people are like, oh, why me? And she said, I could think that, but then if I think that about bad stuff, I have to think it about good stuff. She's like, this just happened to us, but it could happen to a different family. She did circle back to something she had said in one of her earlier social posts, where she talked about needing answers, needing peace, and that somebody out there knows something, which I think is completely accurate, that people don't vanish without a trace. And that if somebody knows something, she just kept imploring them, please do the right thing, tell the truth. Because she said, we can't breathe, we can't live, we can't be at peace until they have answers. And, once again, just so heartbreaking to hear what they're going through.
I am hoping that there's going to be some resolve or some break in the case or something soon. I took away from the interview as well that they are sitting in limbo every day. If they could just get a why or a who or a motive or something, I feel like they would feel better. I don't want to use the term closure, but just to have one singular answer, and to wake up and her imagining her mother ripped from the bed, not knowing who, why, or anything is so much harder if you had some sort of clarity. So I'm just hoping and praying that, soon there's going to be some development or something that can hopefully put a lot of these lingering questions that I can imagine are running millions of miles an hour through her head every day to rest. Um,
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And, being somebody of faith, they want their mother returned to them, even if she has passed away, so that they
yeah.
can properly honor her life and, you know, put her to rest. I want to just circle back to one more thing. We were talking about the joy, how doesn't want to allow the kidnappers to take her joy. She said, the joy will be my protest. In other words, she's going to go on in spite of this and live her life the best she can, as I'm assuming her siblings as well. And, she said, again, I don't know what I'm going to be like when I return, but I'm going to give it a try. And so, again, that date is April 6th.
I look forward to seeing her on April 6th and sort of them all being reunited. And we'll, continue to follow this case as we've done since its inception. And hopefully we'll bring updates sooner than later.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to Crime Capsule Daily.